Hello, I'm Lindsay Johnson, and I'm part of the Worldwide Clinical Trials team. Thank you for joining our on-demand webinar series, Measuring Biopharma Confidence. We've worked with Kineticos Life Sciences to survey top executives from biopharmas to create a confidence index and quantify sentiments about our industry. For Q1 of 2020, we've been conducting discussions on key findings with industry experts. This is the fourth webinar in our series, so don't forget to check out the other three as well. Now here's Philip, who will be moderating the next discussion. Take it away, Philip.
I want to thank everyone again for joining us today for our fourth in a series of weekly panel discussions covering the Q1 edition of the 2020 Biopharma Confidence Index, or BCI, co-sponsored by Kineticos Life Sciences and Worldwide Clinical Trials. The BCI is intended to be a forward-looking index designed to measure C-suite and executive leadership sentiment in the biopharma industry. I want to start today by thanking our four panelists for joining us. We have Aman Kira, Global Head of Regulatory Strategy at Worldwide Clinical Trials, who's returning from our second panel discussion. So welcome back, Aman.
Thank you very much.
We also have Kevin Hampton, Senior Vice President of Biopharma at Kineticos. Kevin?
Glad to be here again, Philip. Thanks for having me.
Tom Zetlow is also joining us, Operating Executive for Kineticos.
Good afternoon, everybody.
And then finally, we have Dan McCormick, Senior Vice President of Biopharma at Kineticos.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Philip.
I'm Philip Galinas. I'm Chief Commercial Officer for Kineticos, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. Over this quarter, we're delivering 5 panel discussions covering 5 specific sections of the BCI survey. With our first panel discussion, we covered the fundamental elements of running a biopharma. The second panel, we covered the impact of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and new technology. And then on the third panel, we discussed raising capital and mergers and acquisitions. Today, we'll be discussing section 4, which is in and out licensing activities, followed by a discussion on CRO outsourcing. Today's data we're sharing is based on a total of 112 respondents, and what we're sharing are only those respondents who acknowledged a confidence level of 8 and above related to a scoring scale of 1, which means no confidence or not important, up to 10 or highly confident and highly important. So why don't we get started? Our first set of charted data and questions are about out-licensing and in-licensing of assets. We first asked our respondents to identify their top 3 indications or priorities as far as indications for potential licensing activity. Then we asked a follow-up question where we asked those same respondents to provide what their number 1 or their single top priority is or therapeutic indication that they would be going after for potential licensing. What we're seeing in the data is that oncology by far is the top indication in both charts for licensing. Given the large proportion of clinical trials in oncology, it's not surprising that this is the leading area for licensing deals. However, what is interesting is that rare disease is almost as high as oncology when you look at the top 3 priority indications as far as responses. What happens, though, is rare diseases tends to drop off when the respondents had to pick their top or number 1 indication for targeting as far as potential licensing deals. And that actually fell behind neuro and immuno-oncology. So my question, Aman, and then maybe Kevin, is, does this indicate a fundamental difference in the way that rare disease development and commercialization occurs as far as compared to other indications? And given the small and somewhat difficult access to patient populations, is there an issue with more effectively licensing rare disease? So Aman, you want to start with that?
Thank you so much, Philip. No doubt, there are many assets in development. For example, Alliance for Regenerative Medicine said that in a report at the end of 2019, there were 647 ongoing clinical trials in rare diseases alone. Now, of the total, 252 were in phase 1, 353 were in phase 2, and 42 are right now in phase 3. These trials focus primarily on gene-modified therapies, cell-based immuno-oncology therapies, cell therapy, and tissue engineering. But let's just, put that aside and think about when people are choosing their indications, they're thinking about rare diseases in a particular indication as well. Now, finding the patients has been a huge logistical issue as well, okay? In terms of drug development, you have to be creative with patient engagement, patient retention. Why does this occur? Because there are far smaller patient populations. Now, there's been a burst in the not only the oncology space, but also the rare disease space. There's startup companies, much more smaller companies than, say, the big biopharmas. Now, they won't have the manpower, nor do they perhaps want to also keep the product in licensed so much as well. So they will look for strategic partnerships as well. They will look for other opportunities for other biopharma to get involved as well. But I think this is all about the rarity of the disease as well, in addition to the rarity kind of chimes in with the actual patient population. And as you get smaller with the patient population, it's going to be hard for smaller companies to want to even commercialize such a product that might be successful, but at the same time, you're going to need some help, whether it is out licensing. And usually what happens is there are either, when there is a rare disease asset, a successful asset in development, there are partnerships that are being formed in biopharma right now. So I'm not surprised at the data that we're being presented today about this and how it shoots off, rare diseases goes down, what have you, as a top response. Obviously, rare diseases do fit in with oncology and immuno-oncology as well, where they are the most popular things that are going on in industry as we speak right now.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. And Kevin, anything to add to that?
I'll keep it simple because I think Iman hit a lot of the good points. I think that both in and out licensing is directly correlated to where the activity and the investment is happening, right? So this is also a reflection of what we see going on in precision medicine. There are just not as many companies out there running those 10,000 patient cardio trials and metabolic trials that we've seen 10, 15, 20 years ago. Everyone's going towards personalized medicine, smaller trials, which brings on other challenges, such as Iman mentioned with patient recruitment. But I think from a licensing perspective, I think these figures would be directly correlated if you were to run a clinical trial data set pool, right? Where the number of clinical trials is going to correlate to the number of deals being done. So I think personally, that's probably what we're seeing here.
Thank you, Kevin. And Iman, maybe I just wanted to add my way of looking at this is top chart tells me companies are responding here where, as Kevin said, where's the money, where are the investments, where are the opportunities? And the bottom is more about how challenging is it to bring one of these products to market.
Yeah, absolutely. It reads right completely.
There's a lot of opportunity around investment with rare disease, but the bottom chart tends to tell you it's challenging to get that therapeutic to market, and that's maybe why it's dropping off. Dan, anything to add?
Really, the only thing to add, Aman had mentioned some key statistics up front regarding phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. As I look at the lower chart there, just another point that's consistent with previous dialogue we've had around gene editing, gene therapies, etc. I believe it was a January paper by pharma manufacturers. I might not have the source right, that I picked up on, I think, for gene therapies, 111 clinical trials as of January are in oncology, 22 clinical trials ongoing with gene therapies or in neurosciences, aligned with the top 2 areas of interest that we see in that second chart right there.
Thank you, Dan. I did have one follow-up question and see if there's anything to discuss here. Looking at the data, one of the questions I wanted to ask is there anything suggested by the lower value of immuno-oncology versus all of oncology. And does this tell us something about these class of drugs when it comes to licensing activities?
I think due to the developments in the landscape right now, that there have been products that have been approved, for example, in one region, haven't quite been approved in another region. And obviously, to get to commercialization is a feat in itself. You really do have to think about the end in mind. And I think about this bottom data tag more than anything. It shows companies are having to think about the end in mind more so than what the upper chart is showing. There might be an issue with like how, for example, we've split out rare diseases. The rare disease could be in the immuno-oncology space as well, but lots of changes going on. Expedited pathways do not necessarily mean commercial success, which is what the immuno-oncology space have been, to a certain point, relying on. I think it's a bit of a reality check that goes on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kevin, anything there for you?
I thought that was interesting too. I can't help but wonder, Philip, when we run the next survey, if we were to try to be a little more specific when we break out these answers, right? Into, one would be non-IO oncology, the other could be IO, and then a third could be non-cancer related immunology to see if we would have got something different. I think what Aman said is probably right, but I think it would also be interesting and probably be good if we were to just rephrase some of this the next time we ask to see if the data came out the same.
Yeah, and once again, just to add, I think one of the things, and Kevin, you've spoke of this in the past, is the top slide when you look at the top three and you know where money is and where news and where people have heard where the opportunities are. Maybe the top slide is a little bit more aspirational, and the bottom slide is more the reality check of what does it take to get it done. We're going to move into our second set of data. This starts to get us into questions that we covered with our respondents about their confidence and in out and in licensing transactions. How confident are they in that occurring? And then the likelihood of seeing more of these transactions move to what might be a payment model, such as upfront payment, versus milestone payments, which are maybe a newer model, looking at milestone payments as that model for the transaction. If you look at the fees as a proxy for the supply and demand of licensed assets in the market, there appears to be confidence in a robust market for assets over the next 12 months. And upfront and milestone payments, those methods seem to be on par, so there's not really any indication that there's going to be a shift in transaction models away from upfront toward milestone payments, at least in this data. Does this fit with your experience? Any ideas on the drivers for upfront versus milestone payment deals? Would you expect those drivers to be different for, say, oncology versus rare disease, for example, or any other indication?
There's a couple things here. I think the first thing is the confidence in the market to do deals is positive, where we're thinking the values are going to increase 10, 20%. So that's very positive, and I would expect to see that. Another thing here to think about is I think a driver at a broad level is where the deals are being done. So if deals are being done at the preclinical stage, a lot of risk involved. There's going to be heavy on the back end milestones, royalties, and probably lower on the front and vice versa, right? So if you go to a more de-risked asset and you're looking at phase 2, phase 3, or even commercial, you could see a scenario where it's all cash up front and very light on the royalties and milestones. Well, so I think the stage of development and where these deals are getting done is probably the biggest driver. And I think it's just a way to de-risk, right? You can de-risk by back-ending some biobucks, or you can de-risk by licensing an asset later in development. And at the end of the day, it comes down to negotiation, your confidence in the asset you're either in licensing or out licensing, and making sure you know what the market looks like in the competitive landscape and being able to project out. So I think that those might be some drivers, Philip.
No, that makes sense. Aman?
I'm looking at this, and those are really good points actually that were made. I'm going to come in with a different lens as well. A lot of these companies, they're running their assets in development. A lot of them are virtual companies, and I'd say a large proportion, would be out licensing, right? Accordingly, to take their asset onto the journey to commercialization. When Worldwide is speaking to sponsor companies, we always ask, what are your company's aspirations for an asset? Are you actually thinking of the end in mind? Are you also thinking about how the due diligence that needs to be undertaken, whether you are on the side of in licensing or you're on the side of the out licensing, the clinical development plan, that's a very important document. More so now that we advise companies on the importance of the regulatory strategy plans. And the further you get in the development, sometimes these are linked, by the way, to how payments are going to be made. If you have a strong clinical development plan, you have a strong regulatory strategy plan, which, I have to make it clear, the regulatory strategy plan usually is folded into the clinical development plan. But the further you are along in this journey, it actually becomes a plan, a document in its own right. I mean, they're both living documents, they're updated, but I know I'm saying asset, but like I said, whether you're on the side of the in-licensing or out-licensing, you're looking to those documents. You're making sure they're updated. And for out-licensing, if you're on the out-licensing side, you're looking to see whether this is a attractive asset to help develop accordingly. And I've had many occasions speaking to the investment community where, they want to see FDA meeting minutes, for example. They want to see what the confidence level is within the regulatory agencies as well. So, these documents, they show your due diligence. Of course, we can look up mode of action, but these really play a key part, more than I've ever seen, actually, how when deals are being discussed. And I've seen 50-50, depending on where you are with in your development. And there was a really good point made earlier that the earlier you are, there's more risk involved. So you are de-risking the further along you go as well. But lots to think about. But product approval, taking it through the development cycle or journey rather, is you have to think about commercialization. Developing the product is one part, but are you thinking about the reimbursement strategy? Are you thinking about health technology assessments in outside of the US? All these puzzle pieces you need to think about. Are you looking at the competitor analysis, the landscape accordingly, and across stakeholders? And we've thought about this a bit. Expedited pathways do not necessarily mean commercial success. I'd expect 50-50, like the chart actually does suggest, with some outliers with, now and then. But it seems quite consistent with how we're speaking to biopharma.
I think you're right. You mentioned a good point. Expedited regulatory pathway does not translate to commercial success. And quite frankly, neither does approval, right? If you can't get access, and you mentioned that earlier, then your commercial opportunity is zero, right? So I think making sure you get input from all the key stakeholders and know what you're getting into, I think that's a big part when you come to the negotiation table.
Well, we're going to move on to our third set of charted data and questions. What we asked of our respondents was their intent to out-license an asset, and at what stage of development were they planning to actually look to out-license that asset, whether that be preclinical, clinical, or commercial. The second chart, and actually what we're looking at as far as data, is asking those same respondents their confidence versus intent. Can they out-license, and at what stage do they see their confidence level as far as where that asset is in development, whether that be preclinical, clinical, or commercial? As you might expect, startups are more likely to out-license a preclinical or clinical stage asset versus the mid to larger pharma. I would expect responses are based on the intent of startups to out-license a commercial asset is more part of their business plan rather than an actual anticipated event in the near future. So it's the expectation versus the actual event. So I guess my question to the panel, and Kevin, if we can start, is how can a consulting firm advise on both sides of potential deals, both out licensing but also in licensing? And if a clinical stage asset is licensed during the trials, how does that affect the CRO biopharma relationship? So
Yeah, Philip, I think you're right on the kind of the blue bar here, right? We're assuming these startups are high intent because that's part of their business plan, not the reality. And as far as how, what type of support they need, and it really, anytime you come to the negotiation table, each party's going to bring their own number and write it on a piece of paper and slide it across the table, right? So if you're out licensing, you kind of refer to it as evaluation, where you can put an assessment together, where you can go to the table confidently and say, look, this is how much my asset's worth. This is why, so on and so forth. And then if you're on the in-licensing side, I guess it's a similar set of activities, but it's, I guess, more referred to as due diligence. And really, again, very similar set of activities, but it's just, I guess, fit for purpose, if you will. Because at the end of the day, each party, the in-licenser and the out-licenser is going to come to terms with their own expectations and their own understanding of the market and the value of the asset. From there, it's just negotiating. So I think it's our job as advisors to make sure they have a robust understanding of the market dynamics, the competitive landscape, get feedback from all the key stakeholders, as we talked about in the last data set. And again, just give the party, whoever you're representing, if it's the in-licenser or the out-licenser, come to the table and give them the confidence supported by the facts and data on what the value of that asset might be. So I think that's an area that we can help.
Okay. And Aman, on the CRO side?
In our experience, I've seen out-licensing deals, kind of like deals occurring in the midst of clinical trials and the development, of course. Through experience, I have to say that the speed of the development of such an asset can slow down if you do these deals in the middle, like smack bang in the middle. If they're done at particular inflection points, end of a trial, for example, or when you've gone and sought out advice or undertaken engagement with a regulatory agency, no matter where in the world, that is more, I think that's more beneficial. And I like to advise biopharma, like sponsor companies, to think about when they're going to activate or complete their deals. My experience is that there will be deals that are undertaken and it's not really looked at to see where, there's an urgency to make the deal, of course, but then there's an even greater urgency to get these deals up and running, which can, if you're in the midst of a clinical trial, can cause a complete slowdown, because it might mean, for example, say you've got a clinical trial, it's in the process of starting up, clinical trial applications are being made to the regulatory agencies and to the relevant ethics committee boards and what have you. However, the local affiliate of this new company wants to be involved. And now there's another layer as such, and to get them up to speed, to maybe change signatories, or who is responsible for the application, who is a local respondent. These are all things that I've seen in my experience that slow down. So on my advice, our advice, CRO's advice has been to be very cautious and to kind of have that diligence in understanding when you're undertaking these deals in the midst of development, to really know at what point what point are you actually handing over or working, when is the green light given, because that green light can invariably slow down the bigger journey. So it's interesting. I've seen many mixes of that, but I always pay caution to the wind like that and say we need to be mindful of that, and turn around, make these transition when there is a suitable inflection point.
Thank you, Aman. Very, very insightful, very helpful. Dan, anything to add?
The only thing that I would add here from an out licensing perspective, and I'll just comment from a big biopharma from that perspective, as you move through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, to me it's not surprising here there would be more increased interest, of course, relative to the earlier stages for out licensing. And I think that's because while you're progressing in the development. Your internal teams are also conducting their due diligence, and they are trying to get as clear of a picture as to what, Aman, as you had mentioned, keeping the end in mind. And they're starting to tune into some of the complexities and the challenges to overcome from a commercial perspective. And so as they've got a portfolio of assets in development, it will be clear across those portfolio where your best plays are going to be. And some very efficacious assets in development, very promising from a clinical perspective, yet tough trade-offs are made to put those on the shelves, out-licensed because of some of the complexity to confront and the relatively limited market opportunity versus others.
Anything to be said about the confidence and the ability, obviously moving up from out-licensing preclinical, moving up even higher, and then obviously the largest confidence or the most confidence is in out-licensing a commercial asset. Anything surprising? I'm not sure there is, but anything surprising or any comments that anybody wants to share on that?
I don't think it's terribly surprising. I think it just goes with the fact that if you have a commercial asset, there's little uncertainty. You know what the commercial opportunity looks like. The market's probably been established or things like that. So I think it's just a matter of it's not a ton of risk involved. There's not a lot of uncertainty involved. And if you want to get a deal done, that doesn't mean you're going to get the value that you want. But if you want to get the deal done and you're motivated enough to get the deal done, you can get it done. I think that's probably what it says here.
I think it shows the risk element in there. Commercial, not much risk. It's not surprising, Kevin. You hit all the points you did as well. It's very expected for sure.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add maybe, and if anybody wants to confirm or challenge, is that while the confidence is higher to out-license a commercial asset, I think it does come back to what Kevin said. Just because the confidence is high does not mean the valuation is higher. Because while you've de-risked it, you also have a clear picture of what the value of that product might be. And so it doesn't always directly correlate between confidence and valuation.
If you're motivated to get a deal done, you can get it done. But yes, if we were to ask the question, what's your confidence in getting a deal done at the valuation that you bring to the table, I think we're going to look at different numbers. You're right, Phil. The confidence in getting a deal done has little to do with the confidence in getting a deal done at the valuation that you come to the table with.
We're into our fourth and final set of charted data here. What we asked our respondents were questions about their intent to outsource specified activities to a CRO over the next 12 months. So looking at this data, we do see that regulatory support and then the analysis of data are listed as the top activities, which would be outsourced to a CRO. So my question to you, Aman, is does this match with your experience at Worldwide Clinical Trial? And follow-up question would be, are CROs often asked to be involved in FDA related activities such as FDA meetings?
Not surprising, this chart at all, because I've seen a huge influx in requests for understanding the regulatory, like needing help with the regulatory submission strategy and also the data as well that needs to be undertaken. And I've been in this industry for 20 years plus, and only as a regulator within just the CRO industry. And typically the work that used to be outsourced more so to CROs were planning and operationalizing a particular clinical trial. For example, a pharmaceutical sponsor would want to utilize the resources that a CRO would have in country to make those applications or submissions, and everything else the company, and it's interesting, the size of the company were typically larger companies, biopharma, and they were able to utilize their own in-house resource. Like I said, this still occurs for a wide sector of biopharma and larger in size. But however, what's changed is that there are more smaller companies now. And a lot of our sponsor companies here at Worldwide are small to mid-size. I'd even say virtual, like N equals 3. Right? And they're not all in an office location. I can tell you, they could be sitting, one could be, on the East Coast, one could be in the Midwest or something, and another on the East Coast or what have you. So when these companies emerge, they're hoping to hit the ground running. They need to operationalize very fast. And obviously, the best way forward is to outsource those tasks and initiatives that they need to undertake. And stepping into, where we are with that chart, you can see a lot of these items that they're hoping to kind of outsource: submission strategy, strategic consultation, request for pre-IND meeting, how to position an asset. All these items do require regulatory expertise help. With that, I can say, what's happened is that the whole profession of regulatory affairs is now very vast, and I can say that from experience. And in larger companies such as large biopharma, and to some extent some CROs as well, you can just be working within one area of regulatory, such as regulatory intelligence or regulatory publishing. And overall, to be an effective professional regulator, you need to be able to use your critical and strategic thinking skills to navigate that development pathway available. CROs, such as Worldwide, have a special place in this whole development journey. Worldwide, for example, we offer help and guidance and support and lend our expertise on how best to develop that asset, not only just with the regulatory lens, but from that, what I talked about earlier, the competitor landscape perspective and the commercial landscape perspective as well. Now, we get the opportunity to knowledge share that experience and expertise that we gain with a wide variety of sponsor companies and projects that come through our doors. So we take care to let sponsor companies understand the nuances, the soft intel, I call it, of making these submissions or engaging with a regulatory agency. And sometimes sponsor company does not quite have the funds to have a full-time regulatory employee or a full-time biostats employee, or that one employee in this very small virtual company is overwhelmed with work. And this is where, a company such as Worldwide has come in. Sponsor companies routinely ask us to provide that direction and support, not just for clinical trial applications, but that strategic advice or early engagement with regulatory agencies. So they're telling the most correct, accurate, optimal story to the agencies to seek their feedback in helping develop their product, most importantly, in the right optimal manner. Like I said, a regulator in a CRO has touched many projects, many products, and we're kind of passing that information on. And, we get involved in, in the intel aspect. So I can give you one example. For example, in April of last year, the FDA announced changes in FDA's CDER, Office of New Drugs, that would create enhanced review zones that would intersect disease areas and divisions. And that was done in order to maximize access to a more focused and innovative, areas of regulatory expertise. They're making sure they have the right expertise in all divisions and offices. But that change has increased the number of those offices overseeing the product reviews from 6 to now 8. And they've also increased the number of specific clinical review divisions in CEDAR from 19 to an astounding 27. Now, that intent is to provide greater consistency and nimbleness. And in a regulator in a CRO industry, they will make sure they understand these changes and keep up to date with them. And most importantly, guide a sponsor company to make the right decisions in front of a regulatory agency such as the FDA. So I know I could probably talk for a very long time about how outsourcing is very key. But over the years, I have seen the shift that the strategic thinking is also being outsourced because the companies are getting smaller. So they're not necessarily, operationalizing and manning up with a full repertoire of all the functions that a larger biopharma would have.
This is just a reflection of how valuable the CRO partner has evolved to over time, right? Whereas decades ago, they were just looked at for one or two specific services. And as CROs have been keenly aware of what the needs are and where biopharma is weak, they've been bolting on services ever since. And now a drug is not getting to market without the support of a good CRO. So I think this just goes to show that what Peter and Aman and they're doing over at Worldwide Clinical Trials is enabling these innovators to get their drugs to patients. I think it's representative of that.
One follow-on question, Aman, and interested in your view, is that you can look at this from what are companies able to do internally and where do they tend to have their resources, and where they don't have those resources would tell you are your higher intent to outsource to a CRO. Or you could look at it as, well, what are the most important things that we have to focus on and make sure that we get right in order to make sure that we move the clinical development of this priority asset forward. And so we're going to find the expertise to make sure that happens. Is there an intersection in this data of both, or how do you feel about that?
I think there's an intersection of data in both. I do. And it really does depend by company to company. It really does. And what I found in experience as well is that it is difficult to hire in. Like, there is a war on talent, right, in this industry. How many companies are emerging or being started up in addition to the existing larger biopharma as well? And there are not enough, for example, regulators in the world, to be able to advise enough sponsor companies. But at the same time, the sponsor companies might not have enough workload to hire in that one person to be working full time. So that is where the outsourcing perspective comes in. And I've seen now, like I said before, it was very operationally focused, and that does lend itself. But if you see the chart, there's a lot more thinking ahead or before you even get to a clinical trial. A lot of these items, or after you've completed a clinical trial, right? You've got the full operational conduct of the study. I don't think that's ever changed, to tell you the truth. But what is the outliers for me over time has been the regulatory submission strategy, the non-clinical data. These are all very new. And in addition, what is also new are, we want you to take over the IND maintenance, or help us submit the IND, because now, when you're submitting the investigational new drug application to FDA, you're doing it electronically. And that takes a whole set of skills and resources that aren't necessarily available to smaller companies. So it's interesting to see this. I'm not surprised either.
Thank you, Aman. That was very insightful. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today for our fourth BCI panel discussion about licensing activities and also CRO outsourcing. These BCI panel discussions are brought to you by Kineticos Life Science and Worldwide Clinical Trials. Join us next week for our fifth and final installment for this quarter, when we'll discuss sales and marketing concepts, political pressures, and overarching economic effects. So thank you again for everyone joining.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Philip.
Thanks, Philip.
you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Hi again. I hope you found this webinar meaningful. Thank you for listening, and be sure to check back soon for our final webinar in the series. If you would like more information on worldwide clinical trials, go to worldwide.com. For more information on Kineticos Life Sciences, please go to kineticos.com. Thank you.